Thank you all for coming. This is great. It's such a nice turnout. You always worry about a room like this, right? Like, wow, there's 12 people. And, you know, it could happen. It'll be fine. But appreciate you being here. And so Ken alluded to a book, and there is a book coming, and I've started it a few times. The first time was in the early 90s, and I was going to call it Redwood Summer. I wasn't there. And you'll see why. And then moving along from there, I started it in the late 90s, and then I started it in the early aughts, and I accumulated a lot of material. Recently, though, I was able to actually write a book. There was a man by the name of Bruce Coburn, who is from Canada and a singer-songwriter musician, and he got a contract to write a book, but he was too busy and had a new child and touring all the time, and he hired me to write and research a lot of it. And I did. And it's given me confidence to take this leap toward trying to write the book. One of the greatest impediments, of course, being economic, because the book is there, and I'm constantly turning over new material. So the caveat for this presentation is that there are several books worth of material just in the Maxam story of this, and the Pacific Lumber story. But what I'm going to try and do is look at the redwood ecosystem as well, encapsulated somehow in this book. And it's not going to be easy. And as I was saying, I keep turning over new information, very interesting, surprising information. Susie Van Kirk is here, one of our great historians. And she has sent me some very interesting material on the formation of Save the Redwoods League and the local work here in Humboldt County to protect redwoods in the early teens, 19-teens. And I keep finding or getting material like this. And it is fascinating, but it's also, of course, daunting. It's a lot. So we're going to cover some highlights here. And what's also a little daunting about a crowd like this is that there are people in this crowd who know a lot more about parts of the story than I do. And I really I'm going to try and get it all correct and not leave out too many very important things, but it's likely that I will bit it on both counts. So forgive me. So this book, again, I want to focus on the redwoods from the beginning. It's as Ken mentioned, it's a 200 million-year-old ecosystem. This is an actual photograph from way back. And it's a living fossil. It's one of the more unique plants in the world. Although I just saw a horsetail coming up through the new pavement on Bay School Road, which gave me a lot of hope. So that's another very old plant. But they preceded and outlasted the dinosaurs, the redwoods. And I also, from there, want to go to the human interactions with the redwoods. And we saw this photo earlier of a Wiyot woman weaving baskets with the redwood home in the background. The Wiyots, for thousands of years, and a lot of native tribes, of course, for 10,000 years or more, lived in the redwood region. Not necessarily in the thick redwoods. That was really not habitable. But they knew those forests, of course, but really outside the forest, and especially on the coast, where a lot of the food was. And the other human uses I want to look at, of course, are when the Americans arrived. And I say Americans because before the Americans there were the Spanish and Mexicans, and of course the Native Americans. But it was the Americans who arrived to utilize the redwoods in a completely different way than they'd ever been utilized before. And of course, nothing like this had ever happened, and no one really had ever seen trees like these, besides the native peoples who were here. So you can see that they accomplished something here. To take these trees down was rather remarkable. So I want to look at how that was done. One of the ways it was done was, of course, with advanced technology. This is the Dolbeer steam donkey, invented in 1881 by a man of the same name. He and Carson had a mill in Eureka. And this, all by itself, advanced the ability to get redwoods, especially off of hills. And that changed a lot in the region. I also want to look at not only the logging of the redwoods, but of course the protection efforts, such as we have here. This is Big Basin State Park. I just took that in March, this last month. And this looks very similar, but this is Delaware Coast Redwood State Park, one of the oldest state parks in the redwoods. And Big Basin, of course, being is Humboldt Redwood State Park. And this is a fascinating story that goes back to Humboldt Redwood State Park with local people here in Humboldt wanting to boycott redwoods in the early 20s because there was a threat of this being logged. And there was a very strong movement here in the teens and 20s to protect redwoods. And Save the Redwoods League grew out of that. And there's a whole story behind Save the Redwoods League that I'm learning too that I'm not going to go into much here, but it's fascinating. Then, of course, there's Redwood National Park. There were a lot of parks bought up in the 20s and 30s, and then it kind of stopped for a while until 1968. This is Lower Redwood Creek in 1968, taken by Martin Litton, who one of the great heroes of that movement, along with Lucille Vineyard, who's also, they're both in their mid-90s, both still around. Lucille still lives up here in Trinidad area. And but what happened, of course, with Redwood National Park is the deal that gave timber companies the ability to log in what became known as the expansion area for 10 years. And this is the before-after Redwood National Park. And Martin Litton, who flew a plane and was a photographer for Sunset Magazine, took both of these. So let's go through the parkland a little bit, because this is going to be a significant part of the book. It will not be the bulk of the book, but I want to examine what the redwood ecosystem consists of and consisted of, and what we have now. You can see here the green, this is a Save the Redwoods League map. The green shows the extent of the coast redwood biome before logging began. And the red shows the groves that we have now, the ancient groves that are left. There are about 80,000 acres of old growth redwood left out of 2 million acres, approximately 2 million acre ancient redwood biome. And these groves are, the Big Basin, as mentioned, it's our first state park, and that took about 20 years. People in the 1880s started trying to protect Big Basin and Santa Cruz area redwoods. Muir Woods, a few hundred acres, our first national monument. Armstrong Redwood State Reserve, where I grew up playing in Sonoma County, just a few hundred acres. Montgomery Woods, Henny Woods, and the Sinkyone Wilderness, about 500 acres total of old growth redwood. Mendocino County used to have more old growth redwood than any other county, and now it has the least. To tell you something about what happened there. And then we get up into the big parks that were established mostly in the 30s. The dates put on them is the 20s by a lot of officials. I was just reading a Redwood National Park brochure today. But really the bulk of the preservation occurred in the 30s when redwood lumber sales plummeted by 700%. And that's why we have about 40 to 50,000 acres of the 80,000 acres that exist is due to that plummeting value. So Humboldt Redwoods is about 18,000 acres of old growth there. Headwaters Forest, which of course we'll talk about a lot, there's about 3,000 acres there. Redwood National Park, another 18,000 acres and about 50,000 acres of cutover land. A lot of it coming back nicely, so we're doing some good work up there. Prairie Creek State Park, it's about 7,000 acres of old growth. Del Norte Coast Redwoods, about 3,000 acres. And Jedediah Smith, which is my favorite of the ancient redwood groves right now, the protected groves. It's about 9,000, almost 9,000 acres of contiguous ancient redwood. So Ken mentioned that, he said I was kind of born into doing this, and I guess in a way I was. A lot of the gist of the Ghost Forest is about this ecosystem that once existed where I was born and raised. In 1876, 4 brothers came out, 4 out of 9 King brothers from Ontario, Canada. And they were my great-grandfather, David, and his brothers, James and Thomas. Thomas owned the King Starrett Mill in Monterey, was one of the largest redwood mills of the period. And William, who owned the King Ranch in Cazadero and was a Sonoma County supervisor for many years. And they all settled in Monterey, Cazadero area, except James, who settled in Petaluma, and there are still kings there, ranchers. But where I was born in Guerneville, just a few miles upriver, looks like this from the air. And if you see, you know what,